All right, time traveling wants to know, when Jesus knew Judas would betray him, could have Judas not betrayed Jesus? How could God know the future if the future isn't set in stone? So what do you say to that? Is that clear to you, that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'll borrow from one of our favorite philosophers, because it is a philosophical question, from William Lane Craig, who talks about the difference between certainty and necessity. Something can be certainly known without being necessitated, i.e. determined by the one who knows it. So just because Jesus knew that Peter would deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed doesn't mean that Jesus was somehow meticulously, causally determining Peter's denial, nor the rooster crowing for that matter. The fact that someone can know something prior to it happening does not mean that that person is determining that thing to happen. So it can be known for certain, but without being determined by the one who knows it. And that is a quandary. It is beyond our full comprehension. It makes our brain scramble just as much as you might remember back in the 80s when you first watched the Back to the Future type of movies. Your brain gets kind of, trying to figure this out, and how time works and time travel. Would that really work? Would this really change that? And all these kinds of things. Our finite brains can't even comprehend simple little concepts like that, much less the A and B theory of time that you've talked about before. But all of those are philosophical quandaries that we can bring to the text. I think what we've got to be really careful of is not to allow our theology to be dictated by those extra biblical philosophical questions, but instead go back to the text and just simply say, is God good? Is he holy? Is he righteous? Does he even tempt him into evil? Is pride and lust from the Father, or is that from the world, as 1 John 2:16 tells us? Go back to the text and let's look at the revelation of Scripture. God is holy and just and good and right, and he certainly wouldn't be the causal determiner of men's evil thoughts, actions, and deeds. And so whatever philosophical conclusions you come to, I think you have to come to one that defends the character and the goodness of our God.
Yeah, and it's not that difficult. I mean, first of all, I want to clarify that I don't see anything here that would result in some kind of a contradiction that would mean this can't be true, even if there is some mystery for some folks. But for me, I don't have a problem saying, like I say this with Peter a lot, Peter denying Christ. Say, okay, well, was Peter not free after Jesus said that would happen? Was Peter not free? Could he not have done otherwise? Well, the thing is, the problem with the question is, God knows in eternity what we freely do in the present. If Peter would have freely chosen to do otherwise, God would have known that in eternity, and Jesus would have said otherwise. I just don't see a problem with that sort of thing. I think Alvin Plantinga has fleshed it out more in his defense of free will, maybe not in the book, but somewhere in journal articles or something. But there are ways of explaining that. And I'll tell you something, some of these things that people seem to have issues with, like this very issue, like the knowledge isn't necessarily causal, as it's sometimes phrased, that if God knows the future, it means that he has to have caused it in a certain way. These are things that this is not me trying to be condescending, because it could be that I just haven't reached this point. But at some point you think about some of these concepts for long enough and something clicks for you and you go, oh, I see what they're saying now. I see what they mean. And for this, I just don't think that's a very powerful objection at all. They're very simple defeaters, I think, to the claim.
Yeah. And the whole set in stone, I mean, what does that mean? Does it mean that he couldn't do otherwise in the present? I would say no. I think he could have chosen many different options. I think that the fact that Jesus knew what options he would take doesn't negate the fact that he had options in the present. And that's the difference between us and God. He's in the eternal now, so to speak. He's above time. His knowledge is not like our knowledge. If we were to look into a crystal ball, for example, and look through the quarters of time, as sometimes it's painted, I think the way he knows things is different than the way we know things, because we learn things as finite creatures who are progressing through time. God's not like us in that way.
God's not like us.